Hey folks, it's a bit of a serious topic for me this week. I've had a lot of questions from people regarding self-harm and how I recovered from self-harm, and I've never really done a specific video on that, so I thought I would. I started self-harming quite late compared to some people. I was 35, 36 when I started self-harming. Mine was very much because I had huge issues with anxiety and depression, and I just couldn't manage these intense feelings. And throughout my life, what I've done, historically what I've done, is numb myself to these feelings using very poor coping mechanisms, which for me has meant drugs and alcohol. Now, I got to the point where I was at university and not coping, and the drink just wasn't doing it anymore. It was no longer numbing as in the same way as it had earlier, and so I don't really know how it came about, but I picked up a craft knife, and that was it really. From that moment it became the way I coped, because with self-harming I could block everything out. I used to call it my white noise, because when I self-harmed my head would go quiet, and I self-harmed quite severely, so there would be a huge management of having to dress it and having to get to hospital and having to get stitches, and that whole kind of routine for me and that ritual was two things. It was to kind of quieten everything in my head and numb everything, because it snapped me into the moment to just have to deal with the wound I'd created. And it was also a way of not killing myself, because I had real issues with wanting to die but being too scared to kill myself and being too scared to live. I tried to kill myself, it had failed on numerous occasions, and there was a bit of me that wanted to live anyway and wanted to be better, no matter how faint that hope was. And so in hurting myself, it would kind of then stop me going the full way to a suicide attempt. And this went on and on and on and just escalated and got more and more severe. But I've now been clean of self-harm for 5 years. I actually had 26 months in a complex needs service, and that was amazing. They taught me some really amazing skills to deal with self-harm. But for me, what's helped me really to stop is the 12-step program. I think everybody has got a coping mechanism that they can find. If you look long enough, something works for everybody, and for me it's the 12 steps. It wasn't supposed to be that way. I went into recovery in the 12-step program to get help with my alcohol after I came out of therapy. But actually, the 12-step program is applied to everything in my life, and by doing that, I've got over a number of issues that other therapies haven't enabled me to do. The 12-step program gave me real responsibility to do things for myself rather than blaming the past, this, that or the other. It was a real take responsibility program. Okay, this is happening to you, this is crap, what can you do about it to make it better? And using that kind of view, I've then been able to kind of one day at a time stop self-harming. Now, there's been a number of techniques recommended over the years, and the most common are kind of drawing red pen on yourself, using ice, using an elastic band and snapping it. I never liked those because that was still kind of doing harm. Snapping a band meant to me doing harm. Red pen was still kind of aggressive on myself. Ice was the same, it was kind of painful, so I've never really got on with those techniques. But what I did have in the beginning, which was recommended at therapy and really did help, was a distraction box. And it's just like a shoebox, large shoebox, and in it you put just little tiny things, sort of things you just get in kind of gadget shops and pound shops. So whether it be like a bag of marbles, or a squeezy stress ball, or a mini pack of cards, or a little puzzle, all those sort of things that just occupy your hands, so that when you're really stressed you can kind of get this distraction box out and play with it. I also put in some positive postcards in there as well. You can get like postcards with positive phrases like you can cope and all of that, and that's really helpful as well. Keeping a diary really helped me as a place to kind of get it all out there. But ultimately it has been just one day at a time, because I think for me my issue with self-harm and with my drinking was because I couldn't stand being in pain, and I was just so wanting to get out of feeling in pain, I would act impulsively and do something like get drunk, get stoned, hurt myself. And what one day at a time has taught me is that I can actually sit with these feelings and they will pass. And every day I sit with a feeling and it passes and I don't do anything like negative, I feel better about myself. And then that constant kind of feeling really pleased with yourself for coping in a positive way rather than self-harming then adds up and it boosts your self-esteem, so the next day when you're struggling with it, you feel really confident in your ability to overcome it again. Does that make sense? The trouble with self-harm is you kind of do it and then you feel really bad about yourself again, so there's this constant cycle of kind of feeling even worse about yourself, feeling like you've let yourself down, let other people down, and it just perpetuates this feeling of you not being a good human being. Whereas every day you kind of cope and go a day without self-harm, even if you have a mess up and then start again, you can look back and go, okay, I've managed for this amount of time. And these things start making you feel better about yourself, because as your self-esteem goes up, it becomes harder to harm yourself. Because when you start really caring about yourself and believing in yourself, then you don't want to hurt yourself in the same way. Exercise is a really, really good idea as well, because that kind of boosts the endorphins, and I used to find that real power walking helped me, because a lot of kind of guilt and anger would drive self-harm for me. So I would kind of go out and pound the pavement, because often I couldn't cope with feeling angry or guilty, so I'd turn it in on myself. So by going out and kind of doing a real power walk, kind of pound it out on the pavement, and also the boost in endorphins, the feel-good hormone from doing exercise, makes you feel better as well. And you end up being more relaxed at the end of it. What I do now, actually, and I wish I'd known about it back then, is these adult colouring books. They're everywhere at the moment, and I've got one, and I love it. And they are great distraction techniques. You can just kind of sit there and just really lose yourself in that for a while. I really recommend those. Ultimately, it's about learning healthy coping mechanisms. And at the moment, when you're self-harming or you're using drugs or alcohol and all the other negative things, they are not useful tools. They do not serve you well. They might shoddily fix something for now, but long term they don't. And the trouble is, you see, when you put down these tools, if you don't have new tools in its place, how are you going to live life? So what you're trying to do is not just stop all of those negative tools, is at the same time develop new positive tools and make this a positive wellness toolkit. So whether that toolkit contains things like your distraction box, going for a walk, adult colouring books, these are things you then gradually build up so that when you're stressed you can draw on this healthy toolkit and use those, because ultimately those techniques are going to make you feel better. Because if you're feeling awful, although self-harm may initially take the pain away, it's superficial, because that problem is still going to be there at the end of it, and you'll have self-harmed at the same time. Whereas if you use one of your new healthy tools, it does mean you've got to sit through this difficult emotion, whatever it is, but you'll use your healthy tool, and at the end of it, you'll go, wow, I got through that, the negative feeling passed, and I don't have a new fresh scar from self-harming, and I actually really enjoyed that healthy coping mechanism, whether it was the walk, the colouring, what have you. So this is the way I've approached it. It's been very much one day at a time, and then suddenly I've found myself in a space where I'm now 5 years clean from self-harm and drugs and alcohol through just this technique of one day. Don't think about yesterday, what you did, or how you messed up yesterday, or about the future. It's just right here, right now. What can you do right here, right now? And as I say, as you gradually start doing things, positive things for yourself, and your self-esteem goes up and your self-love goes up, it then becomes harder to do the self-harm. The key is never to beat yourself up. It's about progress, not perfection. A term from my 12-step program, which I absolutely love. I can never be perfect. Half my problem was trying to be perfect, feeling too bad about the fact that I couldn't, and then hurting myself. It's progression that is really, really, really important. So if you go 4 days and you haven't self-harmed, and you self-harmed once, you haven't undone those 4 days, you've had a blip. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start again. Congratulate yourself for A, having those days off, B, noticing, wanting to do better and picking yourself up, and then focus on that moment. Ultimately, it's self-love that helps to drive change, and that belief that you are worth it, that you deserve better in your life, and treat yourself as you would treat a small child, with love and with care and with compassion. I hope sharing that with you helped in some way. I'm always really happy to openly discuss these things, being on the other side of it, because I know what it's like when you're there and you don't think that you're ever going to be able to stop, and it's just not possible, and all of this. Sometimes you just need people to tell you that it'll be okay, that you can do it, and remind you of your own capability. That's why having support groups is great. There are many support groups out there for self-harm. Doctors are brilliant, and I will say one thing: if you know somebody that's self-harming, do tell on them. I know it feels an awful thing to do, but they'll thank you for it. A good friend of mine who I was living with was the first person to find out I was self-harming. I answered the door to her in my dressing gown. I hadn't covered my wrists that at the time were covered in self-harm. She noticed, and she told my then girlfriend at the time. And because of that, the issue was brought to a head. And once you shine the light of awareness on something, it becomes much harder to do it, because these things need to be done subconsciously, because once it's in conscious awareness, you'll be like, oh, this is an issue, it really is. So your friend might not thank you now, but you are ultimately saving their life and helping them towards a healthier, happier future if you find them some help. So yes, I hope that was of some help. Please do message me if I can help any further. I'm always really, really happy to talk at length about this. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Have a good week, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.